Was and will be going to review last week's lesson a little bit and then moving forward into Ephesians chapter 5. So I made up a slideshow that showed, that quickly reviewed chapter 4 and then added a slide or two for the first 8 verses of chapter 5 and didn't bring it. So it's not going to make a lot of difference, but it will make a little difference. So I'm going to actually use, just as a quick review, some of the slides, essentially all the slides, I guess, from last week, just to remind you. Ephesians 4, in my opinion, we've covered it, of course, but as you well know, things fade very quickly in our minds from week to week. It's difficult to remember what the lesson was from past weeks. And I think I've told you before that quite often I go back and look at my own lesson online to help me remember what I talked about. And so if I can't remember exactly, where I ended or something, how could I expect you to remember anything like that? So anyway, what I want to do is quickly review chapter 4, and then the intent is to get through chapter 5, verse 7. And that particular section is about imitating God. Chapter 4, I believe, is one of the most important chapters in the Bible because it tells you the way you should live. And, I would value that kind of advice. Giving you all kinds of theological discussions and explanations of the details of how grace and faith work, and those are great. But if you can tell me how to live, I can actually look at that and go, okay, I need to do that. And if you're a person that sets goals in your life, you can actually set a goal to either achieve or at least move in the direction of those things. You may not achieve them, at least not to the level that it would be appropriate, but at least you can move in that direction. And quite often, people will make goals and have, unfortunately, they make impossible goals quite often. But even if you make achievable goals, there's another step you have to take. You can't just have the goal of going to college. You got to have an implementation plan. You got to have a plan for achieving that. I suspect I've told you every story I know, so I'm probably repeating myself. But when I was 16 years old, I decided I wanted to be able, as soon as possible, to pay cash for a brand new car. Now, how many 16-year-olds do you know can pay cash for a car? 0, unless Daddy hands them the whole thing. If Daddy hands them the money, okay, they can pay cash. My father and mother didn't have that kind of money. So at the age of 16, I said, as soon as I possibly can, I want to pay cash, not for a used car, a brand new car. Walk in the showroom, say, this is how much I'm willing to pay, and lay it down right then and there. So I had to have an implementation plan. And the plan, of course, is to lay aside money until I have enough money to do it, right? Because if you don't lay aside money, you're never going to have it, right? Because you will spend all of your money. So I started laying aside, $1 or $2 a week or something. I don't even know if I had a job or anything. Maybe I had an allowance. And so I started laying aside a little bit of money. And people go, $1 a week? That is never going to buy you. In those days, a pretty decent car could be had for about $6,000 or $7,000. Well, when I was 16, it was quite a bit less than that. But when I finally achieved it, it was about $6,000 or $7,000 for a decently nice car. I went off, finished high school, kept accumulating a little bit of money here and there, and when I got a job, I would accumulate a little more, and then I went off to college, and then I got married, and then I had some kids, and I'm still accumulating. And of course, I'm having to drive a car all this time, so I'm probably making car payments through these years. And I'm just slowly accumulating money. And when I turned 32, Tyra and I went down to the Chevrolet dealership, I guess. Yeah. And we had 2 kids at the time, I believe. Yeah, we had 2 kids at the time. That's how many we have. And bought a Caprice Classic station wagon, which of course is the car that a family buys in those days, a station wagon. In fact, we were thinking about trying to save some money by buying a Malibu Classic, the smaller version. And when I saw the price for it, I said, what would a full-size Caprice Classic cost with the same stuff? And it was about $230 more. And I went, why would I buy a Malibu when I can get the full-size thing for another $200? You know, so we ended up buying this car and paying cash. It was about $7,000, paid cash for it. And then I said, I want to continue doing this. So what is the plan? How do you continue doing that? You pay yourself a car payment, even though you don't have a car payment, for the next N years, and then you buy the next car. So there was an implementation plan. By the way, the last two cars I bought, I did not pay cash for it, even though I had planned to do so. When I found out that the interest rates were so low, I said, you know, it might as well be zero interest rate for 2 or 3%. You know, I can make better than that, you know, on my investment, so I'm not going to take out investment money to pay for that. But anyway, the point is, if you make a goal, you need to have an implementation plan. And so if you want to achieve these kinds of things that we're talking about, or at least move in the direction of those, you have to have a plan. So you sit down and you say, okay, I want to be more humble and gentle. How can I move in that direction? And the first thing you need to do is become more conscious of the goal. That's the first thing, because you can't go, I want to be more humble and gentle, and then go bless somebody out, as they say, you know, without even giving a second thought. Okay, that wasn't very humble and gentle, so maybe you need to back up and say, okay, I need to maybe think before I talk too quickly, or maybe consider that the other person might be a little upset themselves. Did you know that if somebody says something snippy to you, and you say something snippy back, what do you think their next response is going to be? Snippier. Because we respond in kind and amplify what people say and do around us. You know, if somebody does that, it's just natural to respond back snippy. So if you're dealing with a person and they get snippy with you, the best thing you can do is bite your tongue and remain calm. That may not help, but it will hurt if you go back snippy. Most of the time it helps, because if they keep being snippy and you keep remaining calm and just talking in congenial, conciliatory ways, after a while they start reflecting that back and don't even realize it, that they're doing it. And people say, well, it doesn't always work. That is true. That is absolutely true, but it works a lot. I cannot tell you how many tickets I have gotten out of since the age of 16 when I would get stopped and the cop walks up to me and says, your driver's license and registration, please. And I say, you know, I am totally and completely and utterly guilty. Thank you for stopping me. Most of the time I get out of those things. I haven't been stopped much in my life, 4 or 5 times in 55 years. So not a lot. But I would say 3/4 of those times I got out of a ticket by just being congenial and recognizing he's standing out in the heat in a very uncomfortable uniform and he's having a long, hard day, or she. By the way, women are much more likely to give you a ticket than a man. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. They follow procedure. Men like to break the rules. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, I was stopped in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. I was stopped doing 55 miles an hour in a 15-mile-an-hour school zone in Charlotte. Boy, was I in trouble. You can lose your license for that quickly. 20 minutes later, and the police car was sitting in the parking lot of the school. 20 minutes later, it's Joe, it's just been a pleasure talking with you. You have a good time and have a good day and be careful out there. And I got nothing. Just because I was congenial to the guy. And yeah, there's a certain amount of fakery involved in it, maybe early on. But if you can actually develop a congenial attitude and a gentle attitude and an attitude that's conducive to calmness, you will be gentle and humble, and the people around you will respond in kind, mostly. And people who won't be gentle and kind around you or who are always causing trouble, guess what you need to do? You need to distance yourself from people like that. You don't need to associate with people like that. You need to just get away from people like that. But being a gentle and calm and humble and reasonable person, even if there's a problem, makes the problem less of a problem. So you have to have a plan and say, okay, what can I do to be more humble and gentle, to be more patient? And I told you that's actually long-suffering, which says it's probably never going to get any better, but I'm just going to live with it. Even though I disagree with it, I'm just going to live with it because it's just never going to get any better. Bear with, especially your brothers and sisters, bear with each other in love. Be unified in spirit by keeping peace with you. If something's going on you don't like, just say, you know, the world will not end if I just let that one go. Just be peaceful. It's kind of related to being long-suffering. Serve and build up the body. Do your work. Become mature. Grow up. Be lovingly truthful. And I already said do your part of the work. These are things we've already talked about in chapter 4 that he mentioned. And he looks at the backside of that a little later, and he says, you know, these people were darkened in their understanding. You know, don't live in darkness in your thoughts of any kind. They were alienated from life in God. They were ignorant. They're blind and hard-hearted. Basically, they're just, you know, wandering around in the dark. They're past being able to feel. They're consumed by sensuality and lasciviousness, which can just be, you know, materialism. I mean, it can be that simple, just consumed with getting the latest new gadget and everything. All they care about is getting the brand new car and the latest iPhone and the best of this and the finest car and everything. That's sensuality. It's not always sexual, okay? In fact, usually it isn't. But that's included too. They're indulging in all kinds of dumbness and in uncleanness. How can a person be happy doing drugs? How is that possible? It isn't. They're not happy. They're involved in impurity and uncleanness when they're destroying their lives. Stuff like that. Greedy, people who are always wanting something else. Again, lustful is just desire for something beyond what you know, just constantly want. You know, and these are things that we need to learn not to do or not be. Let's see, next. And then he says, but you know Christ, so you heard and were taught, you put off your old self, you were renewed in your spirit and your mind, and you put on a new self to be like God. And this is where we get our power, to do all of those other things. This is where we get our power, it's from God. Okay, then he continues with living this worthy life. Don't lie, speak the truth. Again, don't be brutal, don't be unkind with the truth. Because I told you, it's always better to be kind than to be right. But speak the truth in love and kindness. Don't let anger cause you to sin. Doesn't say don't get angry. It just says don't let that cause you to sin. Don't carry a grudge. That's sinful. Don't let evil get a foot in the door. Okay. You know, well, it'd be okay if I did this. You know what the concept of boiling a frog is? It's also the camel's nose in a tent. You take a frog, you put him in cool water on the stove, turn the heat up really low, and the frog's a cold-blooded animal. You know what happens after about 20 minutes? The frog just gets warmer and warmer. It's so much and pretty soon frog boiled and dead. So you can use that concept, good or evil, if you're trying to make a change, either in your life or somebody else's life, preferably somebody else's life. If you're aware of it, just change immediately. But if you're trying to make a child change or something, or a relationship change, make small incremental changes so that they can get used to that change and just keep it moving in the right direction. And pretty soon they're well here. And their lives change. Hopefully you do that for good reasons. People also use it for bad reasons. They will try to change things slowly. A lot of our social conventions nowadays have been kind of changed slowly over the years, and we've gotten used to them. We don't think much about it anymore. If you look where some social conventions were when you were a young adult, and where they are now, you go, my goodness, how did it get so far off? It just slowly moved. And there were people who knew that they were doing it in some, or maybe they were just doing it unconsciously. But you can't even make a good change. A big good change instantly. People will fight, even if it's a good change. So don't let evil even get a foot in the door, because once evil gets a foot in the door, you get used to it. And then all of a sudden, there's an entire leg of evil in the door. And then the body's halfway in the door. And it's not long before evil's standing right there with you in your home, and you go, hey, how did you get in here? And he goes, well, you let me in. If you don't like it, leave. You know. You can't even allow a little of it to come in, because you get used to it after a while. The work and share your earnings is the part of the chapter 4 where he's talking. He says, "Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him work with his hands, so that he will have enough to share with the needy," or with others. I don't remember the exact word there. He doesn't say so that you'll have enough to take care of yourself, or so that you'll have enough to give to the church. But he takes it a third level and says so that you'll have enough, by implication, to take care of yourself, to be generous. Well, of course, giving to the church in my mind is contributing to needy things, but you know, we have that, we treat that almost like a separate item, you know. Enough to be generous with the family, and then be able to actually take care of the needs of some other people. Wow. You know, we would say, you need to pay your own bills, and stop right there, wouldn't we? You need to quit stealing and pay your own, and work and pay your own bills, and quit taking it from other people. He goes 2 levels beyond that. Not only do you have enough to take care of yourself and enough to be generous with the giving of the church to keep it going or whatever, but you also have enough money left over to actually give to people who need help directly. And that doesn't just apply to the people who were stealing. That applies to everybody. I think he was using a strong, violent example to give a general rule for everybody. You say, well, I don't steal, so I guess I don't have to work, you know. Well, if you're rich, okay, but you still need to do those other things if you're rich, okay? You still need to take care of your own bills, be a good giver at church, and help other people, especially if you're rich, because you have a huge excess. So, work and share your earnings. These are part of living worthily. Speak wholesomely and encouragingly. We talked about that, I think, at some length last week. It's so easy to talk negatively to people. It's just too easy to do that, and to think negatively. Every time your brain starts going negative, shut it off and go in the other direction. Even if you know that it's a negative situation, maybe it'd be better just not to think about it. You know, unless you're forced to do it. But don't just automatically go to the negative side of everything. And I know you know people, you wouldn't do that, but I know you know people who would and who do every time. In fact, most TV shows are designed around going to the negative immediately. Even the comedies always go to the negative first. It's really, really sad that things like that happen. And then toward the end, right at the end, the last 12 verses of Ephesians 4, 30 through 32, he says, don't grieve the Spirit of God. One translation says, don't give him sorrow. Don't make him sorrowful. You know, you can make God sad. Get rid of bitterness, rage, anger. Get rid of brawling, slander, malice. Everybody knows what those things are, I hope. Malice is one of those words that means, mal means bad in French. M-A-L is bad in French. It means to think badly about things toward other people. Slander, of course, is to lie about people or things. Brawling, of course, is fussing and fighting. And I guess you know what bitterness, rage, and anger are. But be kind, be tenderhearted, compassionate is some of the translations say that. Care about other people. Be forgiving, just as Christ forgave you. So these are the things that he lists as either being things you should do or things you shouldn't do to live a worthy life. And then this is what I was going to talk about today and what I'm intending to talk about now. And I had a slide for it, but I don't have it here. So we're just going to have to do without it. So what he does in Ephesians 5, beginning with the first verse, and I'm actually looking at 4 different verses here, because in some cases they may use slightly different words. Ephesians 5:1 says, "Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children." Some of the other verses say, "Be followers of God," but I like imitators better. A follower is someone who mimics their teacher. If you follow a certain teacher, you mimic what they teach. You're imitating them. Be imitators of God, therefore. I'm reading from the NIV primarily. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you, there must be not even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of purity or of greed. Some of these are being repeated from the previous chapter, because these are improper for God's holy people. Remember, we talked about you're holy. He's saying you're holy people. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. I want to make a quick note here. The word here for thanksgiving or thanks is the Greek word from which we get the term that some religious groups use when they refer to communion. It's Eucharista, thanks or thanksgiving. You've heard of the Eucharist, which is what I believe the Catholics, the Anglicans, and maybe another 1 or 2 religious groups refer to the communion as the Eucharist. It's the thanksgiving. And that's what this word is here. It's a word for giving thanks or thanksgiving. He says you shouldn't do these bad things. You should do things which are proper, and you should be giving thanksgiving. Verse 5, "For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person," and then he has a parenthetical expression, "such a man as an idolater." So let me back up. "No immoral, impure, or greedy person has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them." Other verses would say, don't be partakers with them. And I had a really nice slide with all of that summarized, and I am so sorry. So let's go back and look at these things and spend a couple of minutes talking about them, and then hopefully I'll remember to bring my slideshow next week, and we'll be able to move forward even more. So he says in verse 1, let's be imitators of God. Let's look at God and say, I want to be like that. And I'm thinking that he's almost saying, okay, all of the stuff we just talked about, all that stuff I just summarized to you, if you do that kind of stuff, you'll be imitating God. And then he says, and I got a couple other things I want to say about it. And so he says, let's be imitators of God as a dearly loved child would imitate their parents. Have you ever noticed when your kids were little, they would mimic what you did? If you were in the kitchen sweeping, our daughter had to have a broom when she was this high. She had to have some, boy, she's sweeping and working and everything. Of course, mostly just stirring up dust, but nevertheless, she's mimicking her mother. Jonathan would mimic me, bless his poor soul. He grew up just like me, and I will pay for that, I'm sure. But our children mimic us. They look at us and they imitate us. And he says, we are dearly loved children of God. Imitate your Father. Do what he does. Act like him. And you remember earlier he talked about a few verses back in chapter 4, to be like God in true righteousness. Imitate God just like a child would imitate their parent. And live a life of love. Again, that says live a life of selflessness is what that means. Agape love is one that doesn't think about themselves but thinks about other people. And you won't do that 100% of the time. I mean, you obviously have to have your survival instinct and taking care of yourself and everything. But don't let that be the only thing. Show some selflessness toward other people. That's what God did. He didn't, he could have just said, I'm sick of this and just wipe us out, I'm just sick of this. In fact, he almost did it in the days of Noah. And Noah said, please don't do that. Please don't do it. Of course, God is acting like a human so that Noah can understand what's going on. If he told Noah exactly what was going in his mind, Noah's brain would explode. So he has to kind of give himself a humanity appearance in his thinking and talking. It's kind of like if with some of you, but not all of you, if I started talking about partial differential equations, your brain would just melt. But some of you could do better than I could at that, and you could melt my brain with something. So, but it's kind of like that. But live a life of love just as Christ loved us. Boy, that's pretty hard. He loved us enough to die for us. Just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. So he is saying, give up your life for others as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Kind of reminds you of Romans when he says, do these things at your reasonable service or worship toward God. Present your bodies a living sacrifice. And the translation there is a little funny at times. It says it's your reasonable. The word refers to a temple servant. I believe it's latria, I think. But I know the meaning of it is a temple servant. So that would be a temple servant. So you could say it's your reasonable service, your reasonable worship, your obeisance to God. It could say a lot of things. But most all the translations get it close enough to whatever, because we don't really have if it had said, present yourselves a living sacrifice, it's your reasonable temple service, we'd have gone, what? So they had to come up with something that was similar in meaning. But this is your fragrant offering and sacrifice to God is what Christ gave, and we need to do the same thing. Then he gives a couple of things. Don't even have a hint of immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Again, that's that foot in the door kind of thing. If you allow yourself to be greedy a little bit, you become more greedy. So just stay away from it. I hope others have heard this story. There was a rich old man that wanted to hire a chauffeur. And so he said, okay, here's the test. All the potential chauffeurs lined up. And he said, what I want you to do is drive toward that cliff at 60 miles an hour and slam on your brakes and stop as close as you can right at the edge of the cliff. And so the first guy rams down through there and he stops about 15 feet from the edge of the cliff. Pretty good. Next guy comes in there, skids and gets almost to the cliff, just a few feet, and stops in time. Stuff's going over the cliff, dirt's flying over the cliff and everything. Next guy comes in, brings in, and it looks like he's going to go right across the cliff. And just at the last second, he slides it sideways, and the tires just go right to the edge of the cliff. And everybody goes, he's going to get the job. But one more guy is coming in, and he gets in the car, and he revs the engine up, puts it in gear, puts his foot on the gas, and he goes backwards. He intentionally went backwards. The guy says, you get the job because you're not crazy You won't even consider getting close to the cliff. I want you as my driver. So see, if you just let yourself be just a little, you can go in the wrong direction altogether. We need to run like crazy away from these bad things that he's talking about, immorality and impurity and greed. He says these things are just not part of God's holy people. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking. And notice he doesn't say you can't make jokes. He doesn't say you can't make jokes. He says don't go around telling off-color jokes and making people feel uncomfortable. And you know, what is the old saying? As a person thinks in their heart, so they are. If your head is full of dirt, or if your mouth is full of dirt, guess what your head's full of? You know, because garbage in, garbage out. And so he says, stay away from this kind of stuff. That these things are just not right to do at all. They're out of place for a child of God. But rather, and he uses one word, basically practice thanksgiving. Be thankful. When I interact with people who don't have much, I find myself thanking God for His gracious gifts to me and kindness. I guess that's one of the reasons we have people who are in need, is to point out how blessed we really are. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be constantly thanking God for the air that we breathe, or whatever appeals to you, or the sunshine that comes out and doesn't burn your head off, you know, or the fact that you are still alive, or that you have food on the table and a place to live, and internet, you know. Are you thankful for your internet and your smartphone? You should be, because there are a lot of people that can't have that, you know. It doesn't seem to be the case in the United States, but the majority of the world doesn't have internet and stuff. There are great blessings in this world for us to be thankful for. And I'm just mentioning physical blessings. What about all the spiritual blessings that God gives you? The calmness that He provides, the love that you have for your family and friends. And some of us have more of that than others. But whatever He has given you, be thankful. Give thanks. For of this you can be sure. Now, this is Paul, who just 3 chapters earlier said, you know, by grace you are saved through faith. It is a gift and not of works. He just said that 3 chapters before. But he says, be sure of this, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, and I'm going to skip the parenthetical expression, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. That's pretty strong language from the guy that just said salvation by grace and not works, isn't it? Same man, 3 chapters later. Of course, he in the same verse where he said grace and faith, not works, is where he also said my favorite verse, you know, you were created to do good stuff, though. Same guy. So that stuff is still there. You can't go around just being an impure, immoral, greedy person. Now, you may have those characteristics, but you need to be working on those characteristics, and you may never achieve them, getting rid of them. But you got to make progress. You got to go in the right direction. You got to major in good, and do your best to be there with His help. So he has no inheritance in the kingdom of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not have anything to do with those kinds of people that do those bad things. Stay away from them. Associate with good people, or the best you can, because good and bad rub off. Remember when he said, evil companionship corrupts good morals? If you hang around with drug users and violent offender, or any kind of people who are, lawbreakers, people who are always looking for trouble and hanging around with gangs and saying, you can't do that long and not get some of that to rub off on you. Now, if you're there as a ministry, you better work really, really hard to be careful, because it rubs off on you. You get sucked into it whether you want to or not. Your thinking changes. There's another saying that says rich rubs off. It does. Education rubs off. Goodwill and kindness rub off. Whatever the kind of people you are associating with, whatever their characteristics or their situation is, if you associate with them long enough, it rubs off on you. Again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't care about people who are in desperate situations or who are in difficult situations, but those should not be your close associates. You need to associate, as a young lady once said in our living room that we were trying to help her and her husband, we need to start hanging around with a better class of people, because their friends were all drug users. And if she'd have done that, things would have gone much better for them in their lives. So don't hang around with people who have all these negative, or any of these negative characteristics. Make sure your friends are better than you are, if possible. If possible, hang around with people who are better than you, more educated than you, richer than you, smarter than you. Because you've heard people talk about when they're in competitions. The best ping pong I ever played in my life in college, and I was pretty good, not good now, was against the Iranian national champion who happened to be going to school where I was going. I played amazingly well, still lost horribly, but I played the best game of ping pong I've ever played in my life. Quality pulls quality out of you. So don't participate, don't partake, don't involve yourself with these people who really aren't headed in the direction that you need to be headed in. They can be a project, a spiritual project, but they shouldn't be your closest friends. So next week, we are going to talk about, not imitate God, since that's what we talked about today, but we're going to talk about children of light. By the way, I want to tell you one more verse that comes out of 2 Peter 3:11, and he's been talking about various things about God and things that are going to happen and stuff, and he uses a phrase that I think is significant. He says, in view of all of this, what kind of people should we be? It's a rhetorical question, of course, but what kind of people should we be? The implication being, we should be all these good things that we've been talking about. We should be living lives that just surprise people in a good way. So, may your life reflect the image of God as you imitate Him in your everyday life through Christ our Lord. Amen.